Daf Yomi, Tractate Menachos, page 49. Starting at the bottom of 48b for context. The Gemara asks, and can one not derive the halacha with regard to disqualified offerings from the halacha with regard to fit offerings? But isn't it taught in a braita? From where is it derived with regard to an item that left the temple courtyard and was thereby disqualified, that if it nevertheless ascended upon the altar, it shall not descend? It is derived from the fact that an item that left is valid for sacrifice on a private altar. Here, the Braita derives the halacha with regard to a disqualified offering from the halacha with regard to a fit offering. Okay. And now we're turning to 49a on top of the page. Today's daf. Tana azos toira sa'oilo. Riba somichle. The Gemara answers a Tana that Braita relies on the phrase, this is the law of the burnt offering, ha'ula. It is that which goes up on its firewood upon the altar all night unto the morning, Leviticus 6:2. A seemingly superfluous general phrase which is interpreted homiletically to include the halacha that any item that ascends upon the altar shall not descend from it, even if it was disqualified. The verse is the actual source for the halacha of the Braita, whereas the case of a private altar is cited merely in support of this ruling. Accordingly, the Braita does not contradict the opinion of Rav Shimi bar Ashi. Tani Rabba bar Chano kamay derav kiv se'atzeret sheshochet anashum eilim kesherin v'lo yolu lebayim mishum choivo amrei Rav alu ve'alu. The Gemara cites another discussion concerning the sheep of Shavuot. Rabba bar Chana taught a Braita before Rav in the case of the two sheep of Shavuot, where one slaughtered them for the sake of rams and not for their own sake. They are valid offerings, but they do not satisfy the obligation of the owner, the community, to sacrifice these offerings. Rav said to Rabba bar Chana, that is not so. Rather, the sheep certainly satisfy the obligation of the community. Amar Rav Chizda mistavr mirasei derav be Chisabur Elim Ushachatan Lishum Kivasim Shrei Kivasim Lishum Kivasim Nishchatu. Rav Chizda said the statement of Rav is reasonable in a case where one thought that they were rams when he slaughtered them, and nevertheless slaughtered them for the sake of lambs. In such a case, it makes sense that they satisfy the community's obligation, since the lambs the air raid sirens, we're in wartime. It's a tense time. Rockets flying over. I just pray that we'll be safe here. Maybe I should, I guess maybe, what I'll do? While this is happening, I don't really have a miklot to go to right now. But what I'll do is I'll just stand in the doorway. Something, Very tense. sit down here. Amar Rav Chizda Mistav Ramil Siderav Kasavu Elim Ushachatan Lishum Kivasim Shere Kivasim Lishum Kivasim Nishchatu. Rav Chizda said the statement of Rav is reasonable in a case where one thought that there were rams when he slaughtered them, and nevertheless slaughtered them for the sake of lambs. In such a case, it makes sense that they satisfy the community's obligation, since the lambs were slaughtered for the sake of lambs. Aval Sofer Elim Ushachatan Lishum Elim Lo Akir Betaus Havi Akira Virava Amar Akira Betaus Lo Havi Akira. But in a case where he thought that they were rams when he slaughtered them, and therefore slaughtered them for the sake of rams, they do not satisfy the community's obligation, even though they were actually lambs. This is due to the fact that the erroneous uprooting of the status of an offering constitutes uprooting despite the fact that it was done in error. But Rabbah said the erroneous uprooting of the status of an offering does not constitute uprooting. Amar Rava umosvinan ashmaitin hakoyhanim shepiglu bamidash ma'azidin chayavin. Rava said we raise an objection to our own ruling concerning this halakha from that which was taught in the Mishnah, Gittin 54a. In case of priests who disqualified an offering through improper intention in the temple by expressing while sacrificing the offering the intention to eat it after the appropriate time, if they did so intentionally, they are liable to pay the value of the offering to its owner, who must now bring another offering. It follows, therefore, that if the priests did so unintentionally, they are exempt, and it is taught concerning this case in a Braita, even though they slaughtered it with improper intent unintentionally, their act of improper intention renders the offering pigul, despite the fact that they are exempt from paying damages. What are the circumstances in which this is the halacha? If we say that it is referring to a case where the priest knew that the offering was a sin offering which is eaten for only one day and one night, and nevertheless he intended the offering to be for the sake of a peace offering which is eaten for 2 days and one night, and thereby his intention was that it be eaten after its appropriate time, is this considered an unintentional act by the priests? Certainly they were acting intentionally. Rather, is it not referring to a case where the offering was a sin offering which is eaten for only 1 day and one night, and the priest thought that it was a peace offering, and therefore he intended the offering to be for the sake of a peace offering which is eaten for 2 days and one night, and thereby his intention was that it be eaten after its appropriate time. And with regard to this case, the Tana taught their act of improper intention renders the offering pigul. Apparently, this proves that the erroneous uprooting of the status of an offering constitutes uprooting contrary to the ruling of Rabbah. Abaye said to Rava, there is no objection. Oops. Okay. There's no objection. Okay. From the Brights and from this Brights, because actually is referring to a case where the priest knew that it was a sin offering and nevertheless he intended the offering to be for the sake of a peace offering, and his uprooting was done intentionally. Nevertheless, okay, sit down over here. Too bad, the bathroom in the background. All right, this is like the closest thing I'll do to a miklat, I guess. Okay. Nevertheless, the Braita refers to the priest as acting intentionally because he's referring to circumstances where the priest says he mistakenly thinks that it is permitted to sacrifice the offering with his intent. Rabbi Zera raised an objection to Rava's opinion that erroneous uprooting of the status of an offering does not constitute uprooting. A Braita teaches that Rabbi Shimon says all meal offerings from which the handful was removed, not for their sake, are entirely valid, and have even satisfied the obligation of the owner, unlike animal offerings slaughtered not for their sake, which do not satisfy the obligation of the owner. She'ena menachos domos lezvachim she'akoimetz machavas shumacheshes ma'aseh mochichin alea shehi machavas chareva leshum balula ma'aseh mochichin alea shehu chareva. Because meal offerings are not similar to animal offerings, as in the case of one who removes a handful from a meal offering prepared in a shallow pan for the sake of a meal offering prepared in a deep pan. Its mode of preparation proves that it is a shallow pan meal offering and not a deep pan meal offering, since a meal offering prepared in a shallow pan is hard and one prepared in a deep pan is soft. His intention is plainly false. Similarly, if one removes a handful from a dry meal offering, the meal offering of a sinner, which has no oil, for the sake of a meal offering mixed with oil, his intention is plainly false, as its mode of preparation proves that it is a dry meal offering. But with regard to the animal offerings, this is not so. There is one mode of slaughter for all of the offerings, one mode of collection of the blood for all of them, and one mode of sprinkling for all of them, since the only factor that distinguishes between one type of offering and the other is the intention of the individuals involved in the sacrifice. Their intention is significant. Consequently, if one of the sacrificial rites is performed for the sake of the wrong type of offering, the offering does not satisfy the owner's obligation. Hechidami. What are we talking about? What are we talking about? Wow, this is a long daf, man. Okay. Hechidami. Hechidami. Ilim dadamachmasi v'kametz la l'shum malcheshes kimaseh mochichan my habi hamikar dekoy karle. The Gemara clarifies what are the circumstances to which Rabbi Shimon is referring. If we say he's referring to a case where the priest knew that the meal offering was prepared in a shallow pan, and nevertheless he removed the handful from it for the sake of a meal offering prepared in a deep pan, Then, although its mode of preparation proves that it was prepared in a shallow pan, what of it? In any case, he is consciously uprooting its status as a shallow pan meal offering, changing it to a deep pan meal offering by means of his intention when he removes the handful. Rather, is it not referring to a case where the priest thought it was a meal offering prepared in a deep pan, and therefore removed a handful for the sake of a meal offering prepared in a deep pan, but he was mistaken, as it was actually a meal offering prepared in a shallow pan? It is specifically here in this case that Rabbi Shimon rules that the offering remains valid, since its mode of preparation proves that it's shallow pan meal offering, which indicates that in general erroneous uprooting of the status of the offering constitutes uprooting contrary to the ruling of Rabbah. Amar le'abaya lo'olam yad b'achvasi yikol kamitz le'leshum marcheshis. Abai said to Rabbi Zera, in response to his objection, the objection to Rabbah's opinion is inconclusive, because one can explain that the Braita is actually referring to a case where the priest knew that the meal offering was prepared in a shallow pan, and nevertheless he removed the handful for the sake of a meal offering prepared in a deep pan. But the comment and with regard to that which you said in your question, although its mode of preparation proves that it is prepared in a shallow pan, what of it? Meaning, since it is consciously uprooting its identity, how can it satisfy the owner's obligation? Abai answers that Rava conforms to his line of reasoning. As Rava says, the merciful one disqualifies an offering due to improper intent that is not recognized that we false, meaning when the physical properties of the offering itself do not prove that the intent is mistaken, the merciful one does not disqualify an offering due to improper intent that is recognizably false. Consequently, if one removes a handful from a shallow pan meal offering for the sake of a deep pan meal offering, even if he did so consciously, the offering remains valid and satisfies the owner's obligation. Okay, new Mishnah. Hamatmidin ein ma'akvin esa musofin ve'lo yebesov ma'akvin esa timidim v'lo musofin ma'akvin zeh v'lo yekrivu keres ba'boike yakrivu bein ha'bayim. The Mishnah says failure to sacrifice the daily offerings does not prevent sacrifice of the additional offerings, and likewise failure to sacrifice the additional offerings does not prevent sacrifice of the daily offerings. And failure to sacrifice some of the additional offerings on a day when more than one is sacrificed, for example, if it was both Shabbat and the new moon, does not prevent sacrifice of the other additional offerings. If the priests did not sacrifice a lamb in the morning as a daily offering, nevertheless they should sacrifice a lamb in the afternoon as a daily offering. As failure to sacrifice one daily offering does not prevent sacrifice of the other. In all these cases, if they failed to sacrifice one offering, they should still sacrifice the other. Amar Shimon, Rabbi Shimon said, when does this halakha apply? It applies at a time when the failure to sacrifice a daily morning offering was because they were prevented from sacrificing due to circumstances beyond their control, or they failed to sacrifice it unwittingly. But if the priest acted intentionally and did not sacrifice a lamb in the morning as a daily offering, they should not sacrifice a lamb in the afternoon as a daily offering. Incense was burned twice a day, half a measure in the morning and half a measure in the afternoon. If they did not burn the half measure of incense in the morning, they should burn the half measure in the afternoon. Amar Shimon, es hamizbeach hazov el biktoires hasamim. Okay, maybe ketoires hasamim. All right, ולא יהיה מזבח האוילה אלא בתום של שחר, ולא יעשה שולחן אלא בלחם הפנים משבוס, ולא יעשה בנו יראה אלא בשיבה כנסת בין הבאים. Rabbi Shimon said, and in such a case the entire measure was sacrificed in the afternoon. The reason for the difference between the daily offerings and the incense is that the daily service on a new golden altar is initiated only with the burning of the incense of the spices in the afternoon, at which time they would burn a full measure, and the daily service on a new altar of the burnt offering on which the daily offerings was sacrificed is initiated only with the daily morning offering, and use of a new table was initiated only with the arrangement of the showbread on Shabbat, and use of a new candelabrum was initiated only with the kindling of its 7 lamps in the afternoon. That's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. The Gemara says, all right, Ba'mine Rabbi Chia Baravin Merav Chizda Tzibom Shein Lahen Tmidin Musafin Eize Mehen Koidem. The Mishnah teaches that the daily offerings and additional offerings each do not prevent the fulfillment of the mitzvah with the other. Concerning this, Rabbi Chia Baravin raised a dilemma before Rav Chizda in the case of a community that did not have the resources to sacrifice both the daily offerings and the additional offerings. Which of them takes precedence over the other? Hechidami ilim timidin diome musafin diome pshita timidin adifi havelahu todir imukudosh. The Gemara clarifies what are the circumstances to which Rabbi Chia Bar Avin is referring if we say that he is referring to a case where the choice is between the daily offerings of that day and the additional offerings of that same day. It is obvious that the daily offerings are given preference as the sacrifice of the daily offerings is more infrequent than the sacrifice of the additional offerings, which are sacrificed only on special occasions, and the daily offerings are also sanctified. Rather, Rabbi Chia Bar Avin must be referring to a case where they have enough animals for the daily offerings of today, and also for either the entire daily offerings for tomorrow or the additional offerings for today. In such a case, there are daily offerings given preference. The daily offerings are given preference since their sacrifices are more frequent. In such a case, are the daily offerings given preference since their sacrifices are more frequent, or perhaps the additional offerings are given preference because they are considered more sanctified because they are sacrificed on a holy day? Amarle tene tuha hatamidin ein yakvin es musafim v'lo musafim yakvin hatamidin v'lo musafim yakvin zeh. Rav Chizda said to Rabbi Chia Bar Avin, the resolution to this dilemma can be derived from that which you learned in the Mishnah. Failure to sacrifice the daily offerings does not prevent sacrifice of the additional offerings, and likewise failure to sacrifice the additional offerings does not prevent sacrifice to the daily offerings, and failure to sacrifice some of the additional offerings does not prevent sacrifice of the other additional offerings. What are the circumstances? What are the circumstances to which the Mishnah is referring if we say that it is referring to a case where the temple treasury has all the animals necessary for both offerings, and that the only question is in terms of sacrificing one before the other? Isn't it Tana Braita from where is it derived that no sacrifice should precede the sacrifice of the daily offering of morning? The Braita continues, it is derived from that which is the verse states, and the fire upon the altar shall be kept burning thereby. It shall go out, and the priest shall kindle wood on it every morning, and he shall lay the burnt offering in order on it, and shall cause the fats of the peace offering to go up and smoke upon it. Leviticus 6:5. And Rava says, in explanation of this derivation in the Braita, that the term the burnt offering with the definite article is referring to the first burnt offering of the day, which is the daily offering. Consequently, one may not sacrifice the additional offerings before the daily offering. Okay, that's 49a, and we'll stop here.